Time to huddle up, football fans, and welcome into the Hard Count Podcast. Thank you for joining me today on this August 13th edition of the Hard Count Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Anthony Galler, and today is going to be a very fun show. We are now less than 30 days away from the NFL season kickoff. Texans, Chiefs, that'll be coming at you in less than a month from now. We've got lots of crazy breaking news going on in the NFL from just today only. But in addition to that, today's going to be a fun show because I will be doing my preseason power rankings. Yes, today I'm going to be looking at the AFC picture. Next week, I'll look at the NFC, but I'll be breaking down my power rankings for the AFC teams today as we head into the NFL season, less than a month away now. But we also have some breaking storylines that I want to get to. So I'm going to do these couple of breaking storylines first, and then I'm going to be giving you my top 10 AFC teams. I'm not going to focus on the bottom part of the AFC, but I'm going to give you my top 10 teams. So I'll give you my 7 playoff teams. Because remember, now we're going to have a 7-team format with only the top seed getting a bye. So I'll give you my 7 playoff teams plus 3 teams that I think will be in the hunt at the end of the year. So I'll be doing that in just a moment. But first, we're going to get to these breaking storylines. We have 2 players signing contracts today. And the first is going to be Everson Griffen. He is taking his talents from Minnesota over to Dallas after spending a decade donning the purple for the Minnesota Vikings. Everson Griffen, the talented pass rusher, will now be heading to Dallas on a 1-year, $6 million deal. So quite possibly the top free agent, aside from Jadeveon Clowney, the top free agent still on the board, has finally come off the board here on August 13th. Everson Griffen, great career in Minnesota. Awesome career. This is a guy who, he's a little bit long in the tooth now. That's true. He is in his mid-30s now, but he's still a very productive player. This is a guy that I think for Dallas is going to make a huge impact this season. I think it's an excellent move for them to get him on a 1-year deal. So no commitment there, just 1 season for $6 million. I think Everson Griffen, playing along with DeMarcus Lawrence, they're going to be wreaking some havoc down in Dallas this season and getting after the opposing quarterbacks in that division. So I think it's a really smart move for Jerry Jones, really smart move for this team. You know, Dallas, they've lost some key contributors to their roster this offseason. You know, Travis Frederick, the talented center, he retired surprisingly at the age of 29. Byron Jones, the corner, is no longer going to be there. So Dallas is missing some pieces from last year. Now, they also went out and they made some really smart additions as well. Bringing in Clinton Dix is one of them. I think CeeDee Lamb in the draft. You know, I don't think this team needed another receiver. They've already got Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, but I don't think a guy like CeeDee Lamb is going to hurt the team, that's for sure. I think he'll have a big year with Dak. So this Dallas team is shaping up to be a playoff contender once again. And this division right now, this NFC East, it's pretty simple. Washington and the New York Giants, you can put them to bed. They're not going to be in the discussion this season. They're still a couple of years away, both those teams, I think. Although I do think the Giants have the potential to surprise some people this year if guys stay healthy for that team, because last year they had just a cluster of injuries to their offensive weaponry, whether it be Evan Ingram, Barkley, Sterling Shepard. So if they can stay healthy, I do like them to surprise a little bit in that division. But this comes down to Dallas and Philly all day. This division is no secret either. For Dallas, this division is going to be about making Carson Wentz uncomfortable, getting Carson Wentz in bad situations, putting Carson Wentz in situations where he is not able to be the quarterback that we know he can be. So one of the ways you do that is by getting pressure on him, by putting people in his grill. So I think that with DeMarcus Lawrence already, now with the addition of Everson Griffen, this is going to be a formidable pass rushing duo for the Dallas Cowboys. And I think that them in Philadelphia, it's going to be a very compelling race down the stretch. These are the 2 teams. Like I said, I think the Giants have a chance to surprise a little bit, but they're not going to be there at the end of the year. I think that Dallas and Philadelphia are the 2 teams that you can look at and say, these are the 2 teams that have a chance to win this division. And I think that Everson Griffen is going to be an impactful player for Dallas down the stretch especially. So Everson Griffen, like I said before already, he's a little bit of an older player. He's been in the league a decade with Minnesota, but this is a guy who we know has double-digit sack potential, and he's already eclipsed double-digit sacks in several seasons already. So I think that Everson Griffen, this is a very smart move by Dallas. It's not Jadeveon Clowney, but you also don't have to break the bank for Everson Griffen the way you would for Jadeveon Clowney. So very smart move for this team. I'm kind of surprised, to be quite honest. I'm kind of surprised that Everson Griffen was on the board, on the free agent board for as long as he was. I thought Arizona was rumored to be in the mix for him. Green Bay was rumored to be in the mix for him. And I thought one of those teams, or possibly somebody else, might snatch him up, actually going back a while ago. But here we are on August 13th, 5 months after the free agency period opened up in the NFL. And Everson Griffen now finally has a new home in Dallas. So that's a very good move for Dallas. It's going to keep them as being the biggest challenger to the Philadelphia Eagles. And while I think the Eagles are the favorite in the division, I think Dallas is going to be right there with them. It'll come down to the end, as it always seems to in that division. It always seems to in the NFC East. Whether it's Dallas, Philly, the Giants, sometimes, Washington's had a few good years, with RG3. So it always seems to come down right to the end in that NFC East. So I think it'll be very, very compelling now with Everson Griffen alongside DeMarcus Lawrence for Dallas. So great move for them. 1 year, $6 million. You can't really beat that. So that was the first signing we had today. Big splash for Dallas. And then George Kittle, the talented Pro Bowl tight end for the San Francisco 49ers. He is going to be receiving a big contract extension. Ian Rappaport reporting that it will be 5 years, $75 million for George Kittle to stay in San Francisco with the 49ers. Again, another excellent move. I hate to keep repeating myself with the same words, but another excellent move here. San Francisco is going to need George Kittle in a big way this year too. He's been the focal point of this offense for the past couple of years. He's burst onto the scene after being a 5th-round pick out of the University of Iowa. Not really much expected of him. He's burst onto the scene in a big way. Already a 2-time Pro Bowler. 2 seasons ago, he set the receiving record for a tight end in a single season, and now he's going to be the highest-paid tight end in the NFL by a wide margin over Hunter Henry of the Chargers. And, somehow it still almost feels like a bargain for this guy because he's been absolutely incredible for this team over the past 2 years especially. I think he's building some chemistry with Jimmy Garoppolo as well, which is really nice to see. And this team's going to need him in a big way because when you look at the San Francisco 49ers coming into this season, they are going to be, at least at the beginning of the season, they're going to be without their top 2 wide receivers from the end of last year and from their Super Bowl run. Emmanuel Sanders, who was a free agent, has now moved on to New Orleans. He is going to be a Saint. And then Deebo Samuel, the talented rookie out of South Carolina who played very well for them last season, he is going to be probably out the first few weeks of the season, although nothing is confirmed as of yet. But all likelihood, he'll be out the first few weeks of the season as he recovers from a broken foot. So the 49ers are going to be depending on Kittle in a big way this year to be the focal point of that passing attack once again. So very smart move for them to get this contract extension done and out of the way. It's not something, if you're Kittle, if you're the team, that you want hanging over your heads for the entire year in a season where the 49ers, look, the NFC is very tough, very competitive. There's a lot of teams in the NFC I like. I'm going to give my power rankings for the NFC next week, but it's no secret, and I don't think many people would argue with you on this. The NFC is the deeper, better conference right now, and I think the NFC has more teams viable for a Super Bowl compared to the AFC. In the AFC, and again, I'll get to in a minute here, the AFC, there's probably 2 teams and 2 teams only that I like coming out of the AFC this year, whereas in the NFC, I think it honestly could be 5 or 6 that have a legitimate chance, not just to be a playoff team, but to actually advance far into the playoffs and make a run at the Super Bowl. So 49ers are certainly in that class. Kittle's going to be a huge reason why they do make it back if they do. So good move for them to get this contract extension out of the way. Don't want it hanging over your heads for the rest of the year. So George Kittle, 5 years, $75 million, the highest paid tight end in the NFL. Makes perfect sense for him, makes perfect sense for the team. And so they're going to be counting on him to have another big season this year. And I think he's going to deliver 100%. But those are the 2 pieces of news from this morning. And now it is time, as I promised, to get into my AFC Power Rankings. And that's what I'm going to be doing for the remainder of the show today. And I'll be giving you my top 10. So again, I won't be focusing on the bottom quarter or so of the AFC picture, but I will give you my top 10. So the 3 teams that I think just miss out on the playoffs they'll be in the hunt, but they're just going to miss out barely. And then my 7 playoff teams now that we're expanding into the 17 playoff format. So coming in at number 10 in my preseason AFC Power Rankings, I've got the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans, they were a playoff team last year. They knocked off the Buffalo Bills in a wild postseason game. I remember I was out to dinner watching this game, actually. It was a wild game towards the end. Buffalo really should have won the game, but they blew it late. Deshaun Watson made a couple of incredible plays, which is what he normally does. And the Houston Texans won that game. And then, of course, we know what happened in the next round. That was the divisional round against the Kansas City Chiefs, the eventual Super Bowl champions. That was the game where Houston was up 24-0 before squandering that lead and then getting embarrassed, losing that game, and getting 51 points dropped on their faces. So Houston, they were a playoff team last year. I don't expect them to be a playoff team this year. I don't think they're going to be a horrible team. I think part of that is because they're not in the strongest division. But I think that Deshaun Watson will keep them afloat. I think that they'll be a 7-9, maybe 8-8 football team. But first of all, we know the big loss for this team is going to be DeAndre Hopkins. That's something that none of us saw coming. None of us fans, nobody in the media, teams around the NFL did not see that coming. So that was a stunning move to see DeAndre Hopkins getting traded from Houston over to Arizona. I think it's going to be a huge loss for Deshaun Watson because this offensive line is not particularly strong. In fact, it's rather weak. We see Deshaun Watson running for his life every single game, it feels like. And I think that DeAndre Hopkins is one of the guys who could really bail him out in those moments. Now, I do think Houston has some guys who are respectable wide receivers. They brought in Randall Cobb. They do have Will Fuller, but and I hate to say this, but it feels like it's only a matter of time before Will Fuller gets hurt again, because that's just how it seems to go for him every single season. They do have Kenny Stills at the moment, but I just don't see enough from this team. I look at the offensive line and the struggles that the offensive line has had. This defense is going to be a problem, and we saw it in the Kansas City game, especially the second half of that Kansas City game. We saw the defense rear its ugly head. And so I just don't trust this team without DeAndre Hopkins as being a playoff team. I think that Deshaun Watson will do everything in his power to keep this team in the mix, but I don't see them having enough to squeeze in the playoffs. So I got them at 10. At number 9, how about another team in the AFC South? And that is the Tennessee Titans. Now, I know this might be a very controversial selection here to put the Tennessee Titans at number 9, because we are talking about a team, yes, while they were 9-7 a year ago, they did make it to the AFC Championship game. They knocked off Tom Brady in Foxborough. Tom Brady's last name was a Patriot. And they knocked off the MVP Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. And, they looked decent for a moment in the game against Kansas City. They didn't have enough to stick around for the entire game. But in the first half, they looked like they were competitive at least, and they were in the ball game. But I think for me, every year in the NFL, this is just how it works in the NFL. Every year in the NFL, you have a team, usually a team from each conference, a team that did really well the year prior and takes a big step back. And then you usually have a team from each conference who was not a great team a year ago, missed the playoffs usually, and makes a big leap forward. And I think the Titans, for me right now, is a team that's going to take a step back. Ryan Tannehill did not have a great postseason run despite winning games. It wasn't him that was doing the work. It was Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry was their defense. So Ryan Tannehill, they gave him a huge extension this offseason, which I did not agree with. I don't think he's going to live up to that contract whatsoever. Derrick Henry, he got a huge extension as well. Derrick Henry, look, I love the guy. It's nothing against him. I think he's an absolute bulldozer. I think he's one of the top backs in the NFL, but I don't agree with paying running backs top dollar just when you've seen how frequently running backs get hurt, how easily they can be replaced, how there always seems to be another talented couple of running backs in the draft each year. So I don't agree with the contract for Derrick Henry. This team had some losses during the offseason in terms of departures that I think will come back to hurt them this season. So I think Tennessee, for me, is a team again. I don't think their record will be all that different than it was a year ago. I think they'll be right around, last year they were 9-7. I think maybe they're an 8-8 team this year. I think maybe they take one step back in the win column, but I don't think they're going to be a team that I think they'll be just on the outside of the playoff picture, and I don't think they're a team that's going to be able to repeat on the success of last year, especially in the playoffs. So I put them at number 9. At number 8, so my last team in the hunt, and I guess you could say my first team out of the playoff picture, the Cleveland Browns. Look, I want to put this Cleveland team in the playoffs. I do. They have the talent to make it there, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They have every weapon in the book, especially now with Austin Hooper coming over from Atlanta. You've got Hooper, the tight end. You've got 2 running backs with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt, I don't want to forget about this guy, what he was doing in Kansas City before his suspension. He was one of the top running backs in the league. You've also got Odell Beckham Jr., you've got Jarvis Landry, so you've got every offensive piece in place for Baker Mayfield. I just can't put this team personally, I just can't put this Cleveland team in the playoffs until I actually see it happen. I have to see it to believe it. I can't have faith in this team making the playoffs until I actually see it happen. So I think Cleveland has the potential to do it. I think they could make the playoffs. I think they could be the 7th seed or the 6th seed. I wouldn't be shocked to see that. But for me, in my playoff picture, I'm going to have them just on the outside looking in because I have to see it to believe it. I can't keep putting my trust in this team every year for them to just disappoint and not make the playoffs again. So I think that Cleveland will be, if they don't make the playoffs, I think they'll be absolutely the most talented team that did not make the playoffs. And you could argue that even last year, they were probably the most talented, if not, or one of the most talented teams that did not make the playoffs. It's going to be the same thing this season. I love what they have, especially on offense. It comes down to Baker Mayfield. It sounds very simple, but it comes down to Baker Mayfield. And it comes down to limiting mistakes. It comes down to making smart decisions. And we'll see if Baker's able to do that in year 3. But if not, I think the Browns will struggle again this season. And I won't be surprised to see that either. But I do think for the preseason, as of right now, I do think 8 is a fair ranking for the Cleveland Browns. So that's where I have them at. Number 7. So this is one of the teams that I think takes a big leap this year. And I'm going to put them at number 7. So they are making the playoffs in my predictions here. But I think they actually have the potential to finish even higher. I think they could be 6 or 5 even. And that's the Denver Broncos. And, I think one of the reasons why maybe I'm putting them at 7 and not a little bit higher is just because that division is pretty tough. I think the AFC West is probably the 2nd toughest division in the AFC behind the North. So I think that division with Chiefs, who are the Super Bowl champions, and not much you have to say about that, an improving Chargers team, and even the Raiders, who I think made some nice additions this offseason. It's going to be a tough division for the Broncos to do well in, but I do think highly of this team, and I like what I'm seeing from this team. I like Drew Lock a lot. He played very well at the end of last year, did not make a lot of mistakes. He looked competent. He didn't look like Joe Flacco. He didn't look like, Brock Osweiler or Paxton Lynch or any of the other guys Denver's had in the revolving door at quarterback the past handful of years. So Drew Lock, strong arm, love this kid. Love the fact that they drafted Jerry Jeudy as well. I think he's going to be huge for them. I think he's going to have a monster 1,000-yard season, possibly more. He's my top rookie wideout. I know a lot of people are high on CeeDee Lamb, and I think CeeDee Lamb will be excellent as well. I think both guys are going to do very well for their teams, but I do like Jeudy a little bit more. They brought in Melvin Gordon, so now you've got Melvin Gordon. You've got Phillip Lindsay in the backfield, so you got a nice little, it's not quite as daunting as Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, but you got a nice little backfield duo there with Lindsay and Melvin Gordon, so I like that. This defense, it's tough to play in Denver. We know that. Their defense is still a very strong unit. They're going to get Bradley Chubb back this year, who only played in a few games last year. So hopefully if Bradley Chubb can stay healthy, they're going to have him. They're going to have Von Miller, Drew Lock, who only started the last handful of games last year. He's going to take the reins and be the starter for the entire season. So I like Denver a lot. I really do. Again, I think this team could be 6 or even 5 maybe. I'm going to put them at 7 just because I want to temper expectations just a little bit. But I do like the Denver Broncos a lot. And I think they're going to be a very tough challenge for anybody that plays them this year. So they're my first playoff team. Number 6 is another team that I think is going to take a leap this year. And I've seen a lot of people who are pretty low on this team, don't expect a lot from this team, but I love what they did in the offseason. And that's the LA Chargers. And I get it. Phillip Rivers is not going to be there anymore. They're turning over the quarterback position to Tyrod Taylor, maybe Justin Herbert later in the year. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how Tyrod Taylor plays. But Taylor's a professional. This guy he's not a huge arm. He's not electrifying speed. He's not going to beat you over the top, but he's a professional. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He knows how to play the quarterback position. I think, I've seen a couple of years ago, I saw Blake Bortles almost make a Super Bowl. I saw Case Keenum almost make a Super Bowl. I did see Nick Foles win a Super Bowl. So I think Tyrod Taylor, look, again, I'm not predicting him to win the Super Bowl, but if you're going to tell me, if you're going to say, oh, well, Tyrod Taylor, you're not good enough to make the playoffs. You're not good enough to make a little bit of a run in the playoffs. I disagree because I saw Blake Bortles almost do it. I saw Keenum almost do it, and I saw Foles win a Super Bowl. So don't tell me that Tyrod Taylor's not good enough to make it and make a little bit of a run. I think he's a professional at the quarterback position. They have, again, kind of like how I said about the Cleveland Browns. This team is loaded on offense. Austin Eckler, outside of Christian McCaffrey last year, Austin Eckler was actually the best receiving back in the NFL. You get him along with Keenan Allen, who I think is still one of the top wideouts in the game. Mike Williams, who can stretch the field. Hunter Henry, again, it's all about health with Hunter Henry, but if he stays on the field, Hunter Henry's awesome. He's a productive player. He's a red zone target. And then when you look at the additions that they made in the offseason, last season for the Chargers, one of their biggest issues, one of their biggest problems was protecting Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers is an older quarterback, not very mobile. The offensive line really struggled. Well, you know what? The LA Chargers said, look, we're going to address that. So they went out, they signed Brian Bulaga from Green Bay, which I think was a very, very underrated but very important addition. And they also, very early in the offseason, before the free agency period, they traded for the guard, Trey Turner from Carolina. He's coming over along with Bulaga. So those are two significant upgrades to the LA Chargers offensive line. So I don't think offensive line, especially with a more mobile quarterback too, because Rivers is great, but he's a statue. Tyrod Taylor, a more mobile guy who can get outside the pocket a little bit better. He's protected this year, so I don't think that's going to be a huge issue for the Chargers. They also made some upgrades on their defense. Chargers didn't really need a corner. They already have Casey Hayward. They already have Desmond King. But you know what? They said, look, we're going to go out and we're going to take from a division rival. We're going to take from Denver, and we're going to bring in Chris Harris Jr., who I think, again, he's a little bit older as well. He's certainly not in his prime anymore, but he's still a very good corner, and I think he'll play very well for the Chargers this season. They also went out and they got defensive tackle Linval Joseph coming over from Minnesota. So this team made a lot of really smart additions in the offseason. I think not having Rivers, look, this may sound blasphemous. This may sound a little ridiculous, but I really think that Tyrod Taylor, I'm not saying that he's a more talented quarterback than Phillip Rivers, but I do think that Tyrod Taylor now, with a improved offensive line where he's going to be protected, a guy who can get outside the pocket and move a little bit, I think that the Chargers are going to have more efficient quarterback play this year. They may not have the big plays that Phillip Rivers will give you down the field to Mike Williams or Keenan Allen, but I think the Chargers are actually going to have more efficient quarterback play this season. So I actually like this team a lot. Again, that division is tough with Denver, who I just mentioned, Kansas City, Las Vegas. I think I might have said Oakland earlier, but Las Vegas now. So that division's tough, but I do like the Chargers, and I think they're one of the teams who missed the playoffs last year who could bounce back and really impress some people this year. And then at number 5, I've got the Buffalo Bills. Is this the year for Buffalo? I think it finally is. I think this is finally the year that team not named the New England Patriots is going to win that AFC East division, and I think the torch is going to be passed on to the Buffalo Bills. Look, when it comes to Josh Allen, he's got talent. He's got talent. He's got the game. It's just a matter of consistency, and it's kind of what I said with Baker Mayfield as well. It's about limiting mistakes for Josh Allen. It's about not overthrowing the ball like we saw many times from this past season. But if Josh Allen can take another couple of steps forward, which I think is absolutely possible for this guy, I don't see any reason why Buffalo can't have a very successful season. There were some rumors, and there was a lot of nervous Buffalo fans that Trey White, the talented corner, might opt out of the season due to COVID-19 concerns, but he did not choose to do that, so he will be playing this year, so they will have Trey White at corner. And, of course, the big addition for this team is going to be wide receiver Stephon Diggs, another guy departing Minnesota. Stephon Diggs, who played alongside Adam Thielen over the past few years, who's an absolute stud receiver. I think this was the target Josh Allen needed. This is exactly the guy Josh Allen needed. You've already got a deep threat. You've already got a home run hitter with John Brown. You got Cole Beasley, who came over from Dallas last season and actually played very well for Buffalo last year in the slot. But you needed that number one guy, that guy who you can line up as your top receiver across from the other team's top corner, and you feel like our guy can beat their guy. And that's exactly what Stephon Diggs can do for this team. So, I mean, Buffalo's defense is going to be no problem. We saw what they did last year. There were no really significant departures for this team as long as Trey White's going to be there and he's not opting out. So I don't see any reason to think that this Buffalo defense is going to take any steps back. It's just a matter of the offense. And I think that now with Stephon Diggs and you get him, in addition to John Brown, in addition to Cole Beasley, you've got a young running back. Last year I think they didn't really give the rock to Devin Singletary enough. So I'm hoping that Buffalo takes my advice here and they give the ball to Devin Singletary as much as possible because I love the way this kid was running the football last year. I just don't believe he got the football enough. So I think if they can do that, I don't see any reason to see why this Buffalo offense will not be much improved from where it was at last year. And you combine that with the way their defense played, and I think this is the year for Buffalo. I really do. I think this is the year where they knock off the Patriots in that AFC East. I think Buffalo is a 10-11 win team like they were last year. And I think that they win the division. And I think they're going to be one of the top contenders in the AFC. So they're number 5 in my power rankings. But, of course, if they win the division, they will be a top 4 seed. So that's the difference, is that my power rankings don't necessarily line up with what seed the team is going to be. But I do think Buffalo, after they win the AFC East this year, will be a top 4 seed in the conference. But number 4 of my power rankings, we're going to go back to the AFC South with the Indianapolis Colts. Now, this may be another bold pick. I kind of feel like the Colts and the Tennessee Titans in that AFC South are going to do a little bit of a flip-flop this season. So the Tennessee Titans were the team that finished 9-7 last year, made that run at the AFC, knocked off New England, knocked off Baltimore, made to the AFC Championship game. The Colts were the team that you had high expectations for. Andrew Luck, a surprise retirement before the season that nobody really saw coming out of the blue. And now you enter into a new era with Indianapolis. Last year, it was Jacoby Brissett for the season. The Colts kind of had to do everything on the fly because, again, you didn't know Andrew Luck was going to retire completely out of the blue. So Jacoby Brissett was thrust into that role at quarterback. We thought we knew what Brissett was. We thought he was going to play well for this team. We knew he wasn't Andrew Luck, but we certainly had higher expectations for him than what he produced last year. And we got off to a pretty good start. He looked good early in the year, September, October, but as the season went on, you could see some of the confidence slipping from Brissett. There were a lot of injuries to this Indianapolis Colts team. Marlon Mack went on the shelf late in the year. T.Y. Hilton was off the field dealing with injuries. So, again, a lot of these teams, it really just comes down to health. Health for your stars, health for your top players. And I think for Indianapolis, look, now you bring in Phillip Rivers. So now you have a guy who you can once again have confidence in every single week. And Phillip Rivers last year, I talked about this with the Chargers. A big issue last year was not that Phillip Rivers was necessarily playing horribly, but I think he just made a lot of dumb decisions in late game moments, and he forced a lot of throws because his offensive line cannot protect him. And he's not a very mobile guy. He's a statue. So his offensive line cannot protect him. He made a lot of dumb decisions late in games, a lot of bad throws. I don't think he's going to do the same thing with Indianapolis this season because the Colts, unlike the Chargers last season, the Colts have one of the top offensive lines in the game. So I don't think it's going to be a problem for Phillip Rivers. I think he's going to bounce back in a big way. I think you're going to see him cut down on those interception totals. T.Y. Hilton, you got to stay healthy, man. T.Y. Hilton's got to stay healthy, got to stay on the field. But if he does, Phillip Rivers is going to have a top target with T.Y. Hilton to throw to. And then you look at this defense. This defense is loaded with talent. They made a couple really, really good moves, maybe some lower profile moves, but a couple really good moves in the offseason. They got Xavier Rhodes, another guy departing from Minnesota. It seems like everybody left Minnesota this offseason. But Xavier Rhodes, after a terrible season a year ago, I think he's a bounce-back player as well. I think he's a comeback player candidate this year as well. Last season, dealing with some injuries, did not play well. And I think a lot of teams gave up on him. I think a lot of teams maybe felt like Xavier Rhodes is done. But now the Colts get him on a cheap contract. And I think that he's got a lot to prove this season. He was, going back a few seasons ago, he was one of the top corners in the game of football. And I'm not saying that's what he is anymore, but I do think he's a lot better than we showed last year. And I think he's going to be motivated to prove it. So Xavier Rhodes coming in and joining that defense. They've already got a few young defensive studs to go along with him. And they brought in a trade in exchange for a first-round pick, DeForest Buckner coming over from the San Francisco 49ers on that interior defense for Indianapolis. Now, he's going to make an impact. He's going to get after opposing quarterbacks. He's going to stuff the run. So I think DeForest Buckner is a very underrated addition as well. There's a lot of DeAndre Hopkins hype in the offseason, a lot of Cam Newton hype, a lot of Tom Brady hype. But DeForest Buckner is a guy I think really flew under the radar. He was a huge contributor for the San Francisco 49ers defense last year. And I think now coming over to Indianapolis, I think this Indianapolis defense is loaded with defensive talent now. And if Phillip Rivers stays healthy, which he always is, if T.Y. Hilton stays healthy, which is a bigger question mark, but if he can stay healthy, this offensive line is really, really good. It's top-notch. I don't see any reason to think that the Colts cannot win this division. I think they're the favorite in the AFC South. Not a lot of guys talking about them. Not a lot of people in the media talking about the Colts, but I think the Colts are a 10-11 win team. And I'm very excited to see this team play this season because I have big hopes for them. Now, number 3 in my power rankings, we're going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh last year, they had no reason to be in the playoff picture whatsoever. They nearly missed out on the playoffs. They actually, I believe, if there was an expanded playoff a year ago, I believe they would have been a 7 seed. So they actually would have made it in. But they really had no reason to make it in. And that was primarily on their offense. Not on their defense, that's for sure. It was on their offense. Big Ben went down in week 2. And from there, it was just about piecing it together. It was about piecing it together week to week for this team. I was actually very impressed with Mike Tomlin. I was very impressed with this team overall for them to have the season that they had despite just awful quarterback play for 14 out of 16 weeks, 13 out of 16 weeks, whatever it was. Mason Rudolph, Duck Hodges, neither of those guys are NFL quarterbacks. I think those two guys are barely even backup quarterbacks, if I'm being quite honest. But this defense, I mean, what is there to say about this defense? This defense played out of their mind last season. Whether it was the addition of Minkah Fitzpatrick, which proved to be an incredibly smart decision by this team. Minkah Fitzpatrick, a couple of times last week, he almost won games on his own, just with his playmaking ability and intercepting passes. Whether it be T.J. Watt, whether it be Cameron Hayward, whether it be Bud Dupree. This Pittsburgh defense is loaded. They've got a ton of young talent as well. So they're going to be a formidable defense for years to come. And now you get Big Ben back. And last year you had James Conner, who was injured on and off. You had Juju Smith-Schuster, who was dealing with injuries. Big Ben, of course, missed the big chunk of the year. So now you get all those guys back in addition to this defense, which played at an extremely high level last season. I don't see any reason why they won't perform at that level once again. And I think this team is a legitimate challenger in the AFC. Like I said, and I'm going to get to my top 2 teams here in a moment. I'm sure almost everybody knows who they are. But I do think if there is a team on the outside looking in who could actually make the Super Bowl from the AFC, because I really think it boils down to the top 2 teams in my power rankings here. But if there is a team I could say, you know what, if the ball bounces the right way metaphorically for them, I think they can make it, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Big Ben hasn't made a Super Bowl in quite some time. I really didn't think a year or 2 ago that he was going to ever make it back to one, and I still wouldn't put him as the favorite for sure in the AFC. But now with New England out of the way, because we know the story with Pittsburgh is that they could never seem to beat New England in a big moment, but now with New England out of the way, this young defense playing at the level they did last year, I'm excited to see this defense once again in 2020. I think they're going to continue on playing the exact same way that they did a year ago. And now, it just comes down to health for number of people. Big Ben, number 1. Number 2, James Conner. I got to see something from James Conner this season. James Conner, 2 seasons ago, he really came out of nowhere from Pittsburgh, filling in from Le'Veon Bell when Le'Veon Bell was holding out for the season. And he played excellent football, ran the ball extremely well, looked great. And then last season, injuries and ineffectiveness, it was a season to forget for James Conner. But I think now this year, he's coming back. The Steelers have a great offensive line, a little bit older on the offensive line, but it's still a very good offensive line. James Conner, you got to stay healthy, you got to stay on the field, but I expect him to bounce back. I think Juju Smith-Schuster, look, a lot was made of Juju not having a great year last year, but there's only so much you can do with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph. It's just the way it is. When you're a receiver in this league, there's only so much you can do when your guy's not getting you the football. So now with Big Ben coming back off the shoulder injury, I expect Juju Smith-Schuster to have another big season like he did 2 years ago. So I think this Pittsburgh team, again, my favorites in the AFC are the two teams I'm about to mention. But if there is a team on the outside looking in that I think, again, they may need a break or two here or there. It may require, and again, I hate to say this because I'm certainly not wishing injury on anybody, but it may require a couple of injuries to the top two teams in the AFC. But if that does happen, Pittsburgh is going to be the team that I think has the best chance. As long as Big Ben is on the field, as long as Connor's on the field, as long as Juju's on the field, and as long as this defense is playing the way that they can play, Pittsburgh is going to be the team that can make the Super Bowl out of the AFC, aside from the top two teams here. But now I'm going to talk about those two teams. And it was very hard. It was very challenging to rank these two teams just in terms of who's going to be number one and who's going to be number two, because I do think they are just millimeters in terms of separation between the two of them. I think there's just millimeters of separation. It's so super close. It could go either way, truly. But for me, I'm going to have that number two, the Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs at number two. And again, I don't mean to be disrespectful by putting this team at number two. I think the Chiefs are absolutely incredible. Patrick Mahomes now with the biggest contract ever for a quarterback. Tyreek Hill is coming back this year. They were able to keep Sammy Watkins around. I think their offense might even be more dangerous this year now with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who they drafted in the first round of the draft. So they're going to have him in the backfield. He's a tremendous receiving back. You're still going to have Travis Kelce. This team is going to be scoring 30, 35 a night. I mean, this offense, you are not going to be able to stop this offense. And you saw the San Francisco 49ers in the Super Bowl last year. You saw that they were able to stop this offense for 3 quarters, and they were doing a really good job of that. Then in the fourth quarter, when the game was on the line, San Francisco's defense was wearing down, and Patrick Mahomes and this offense came to play in the fourth quarter. And I know Mahomes did not have a great game from start to finish, and I don't think that he was the MVP of that game, in my opinion. But he did come alive in the fourth quarter, certainly more than he was in the first 3 quarters. And I don't think there's really much chance of any team, no matter how good your defense is, I don't think there's much chance of any team slowing down this offense for full 4 quarters. I think if you're going to beat Kansas City this year, you're going to have to outslug them, as they say in baseball. Or in this case, you're going to have to outscore them. And I think that there are very few teams who can actually score with the Chiefs. So that's why I put them at number 2. They are fantastic. The only reason I'm going to put them at number 2 is because I'm going to put the Baltimore Ravens at number 1 of my power rankings. And I just think this team, and again, it's millimeters of separation between them and the Kansas City Chiefs. But this team right now is so well-rounded. I really can't think of a weak spot for this team. Lamar Jackson coming off an MVP season, he's got to finally get it done in the playoffs. And, that's the monkey on his back right now. He'll tell you, I don't have to tell you. Lamar will tell you that's the monkey on his back right now. He's going to get it done in the playoffs after losing to the Chargers in embarrassing fashion 2 years ago. And then last year in possibly even more embarrassing fashion, because I think that there were so many more expectations on Lamar Jackson last season's playoffs, and losing at home to the Tennessee Titans and Ryan Tannehill was certainly not in his plans. But again, we know this guy. We know how talented he is, how electric he is, how just incredible he is every single week. And then, of course, you've got Mark Ingram in the backfield. You've got Marquise Hollywood Brown. You've got the tight end Mark Andrews. And then when you look at the defensive side of the football, last season this defense, aside from probably San Francisco and then maybe Pittsburgh, although I think, you could certainly argue any of those teams. But I think that this Baltimore defense was last year the second or third best defense in the league. Well, you know what? Now they go out and in a trade, and they trade a 5th-round pick for him too. It's not like they even gave up anything. They went out and they got Calais Campbell coming over from Jacksonville to add to this defensive front. So they're going to get pressure on the quarterback with Campbell, with Judon, they're going to get pressure on the quarterback, and then they're going to be able to cover your top receivers too, whether it be Marlon Humphrey, whether it be Marcus Peters. This defense is absolutely loaded. It's going to be a special defensive year for them again. I think them and the Pittsburgh Steelers, look, I love this Pittsburgh team. I do, and I think that they have, again, if they get a couple of breaks here and there, if the ball bounces the right way for them, I think Pittsburgh is a dark horse Super Bowl team. But there's no doubt in my mind that Baltimore is the clear-cut favorite in this division. Just talent from top to bottom on this roster. They're deep as well, so it's not like they just have a bunch of stars and then no depth. They have the depth as well. So I think Baltimore is going to be the Super Bowl favorite heading into the season in the AFC. And I know that's maybe a little bit of a bold thing to say because Kansas City is the defending Super Bowl champions. I get that. But the addition of Calais Campbell was huge for them. I love that. I think that Lamar Jackson is going to be even more motivated and have even more of a chip on his shoulder than he did going into last season. Because now the narrative is going to be, well, Lamar Jackson, he's a great regular season quarterback. He's an MVP of the regular season, but he can't get it done in the playoffs. He loses at home in the playoffs. He's lost twice at home in the playoffs already. He's lost to Ryan Tannehill last year. So that's going to be the narrative for Lamar Jackson heading into this season. And I think he's going to be super, super motivated to change that narrative. So I think that Kansas City, of course, is going to be most people's favorite in the AFC, and that's completely understandable. They are the defending champs, and they really pretty much return everybody from a year ago. In addition to Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the backfield, is going to be great for them. But for me, Baltimore is number one in my AFC Power Rankings. I think them and the Chiefs are going to be in the AFC Championship. Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Indianapolis, again, maybe if the ball bounces the right way here and there, if they get a couple of breaks here and there, I could see one of those teams possibly making a little bit of a run at the AFC Championship game. But for me, it comes down to the Chiefs and the Ravens. I'll give the Ravens a slight smidge of an edge right now, but it is incredibly close, and those two teams are going to be very exciting to watch this season. So that is my top 10 in the AFC Power Rankings. And again, just to review and wrap it up for today, I've got the Texans at 10, Titans at 9, and the Browns at 8. So those three teams just missing out on the playoffs. The Broncos at number 7, they're going to be my first playoff team in the expanded format here, the 7th seed. And then I've got the Chargers, the Bills, the Colts, the Steelers at 3, the Chiefs at 2, and the Ravens at 1. So that is my AFC top 10 preseason edition heading into September pretty soon here, actually. So next week, I'm going to be doing my NFC top 10. So I'll give you my 3 teams in the hunt for the AFC playoff picture, and then my 7 playoff teams in the NFC, in my NFC Power Rankings next week. So that's going to actually do it for me today. I hope you enjoyed listening. I want to remind you to subscribe to my channel. I'll be coming back at you next week with my NFC Power Rankings. So I'll see you next time from the gridiron. Take care, and I'll see you next time.